Decisions good dads make. For this Father's Day, which is 19 June, I will cover it for 3 weeks as I feel it is important to connect fathers, their love for their family, and compassion and faith in God. To put this weekly word together, I Googled famous and faithful fathers, and this is what I found. God, the Father of the Trinity. Noah, a righteous man. Abraham, father of the Jewish nation. Isaac, an obedient son who trusted God. Jacob, father of the 12 tribes of Israel. Moses, giver of the law. David, a man after God's own heart. Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist. Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus. And then I said to myself, hey, 2 fathers are missing in this list. Mordecai and Judah. You need to hear their stories. Mordecai provides us with a great example of how to be a good father, even though he wasn't one in some way. Mordecai isn't a father by choice. He is an adoptive father. Maybe a single dad for all we know, because his wife is never mentioned. Many of the Jews had returned to Jerusalem after a period of 70 years of captivity in Persia, and the Persians had been strangely kind to the Jews. Consequently, some of them decided to remain in Persia. The book of Esther is the only account in the Bible of the Jews who chose to remain in Persia after the captivity. God is not mentioned in Esther, but it gives us an interesting insight into the lifestyle and the ways and means of those people who stayed behind. It's quite a story. However, even though God is not mentioned, God is there behind the scenes of what is happening in the book of Esther. So let's review the characters in Esther. Mordecai, an adoptive father. Hadassah, or Esther, an orphan raised by Mordecai. She was beautiful and won a beauty contest and became a Persian queen to King Xerxes, king of Persia. Haman, the Persian king's prime minister who hated Mordecai and the Jews. Read the short book of Esther and listen to the devotional now that I found on Esther. It isn't over until it's over. Many issues have been resolved already. The villainous Haman has met his end, and to the resolve of Mordecai and Esther. At the beginning of Esther chapter 8, the shape of Haman's death and promotion for Mordecai to replace him as prime minister is there. However, Haman's edict to exterminate the Jews in Persia had not yet been reversed. It was still hanging over the heads of the Jews. It is interesting to observe what happened when Esther finally spoke to the king about her background and her relationship to Mordecai. Far from being disturbed by the revelation that Esther was Jewish, the king's response to the news was to promise Mordecai a job in his cabinet and Haman's former position as prime minister. This again shows the unseen hand of God in the book of Esther. In Esther 8, verses 5 and 6, we find Esther asking for a new edict to be issued. It is interesting that she asked this based on what Mordecai said to her. Did she not know that the king's edict could not be reversed? Could God's people be preserved when a decree of the king could not be revoked? The king's response is in verse 8. Write to the Jews as you see fit, he said. It is once again a manifestation of the providential hand of God. Remember, if God can change the heart of the people in Persia, he can change any heart of anyone at any time. Esther 8, verse 9 is the longest verse in the Bible, and the edict was written by Esther and sent to all the 127 provinces of Persia, making sure that no one was left out. Clearly, once again, the providence of God was working to save the Jewish people in Persia from being killed. Haman's wicked edict was sealed with the signet of the king. God had turned the tables, and now Mordecai possessed the signet ring of Haman because the king had given it to him. God's purpose in these matters goes farther than any despairing of the Jews from destruction. He also purposed to raise up Mordecai as the prime minister, as a replacement for Haman. After the issuing of Haman's edict, the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. That's in Esther 3, verse 15. But after Mordecai's edict was published, they rejoiced. That's in Esther 8, verse 15. This joy came before the actual day appointed when the Jews would be attacked. Yet they were now able to defend themselves. In the same way, our course in life is not yet run. Our salvation is not yet complete. Yet we can rejoice because our confidence is in our King, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. In Philippians 1:6 it says, being confident of this very thing, that he who had begun a good work in you will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. Remember, God answers our prayers way beyond what we can ask of or think. That brings me to a personal story of asking God to help me resolve a situation affecting my son in Ethiopia in 1969 when he was 13 years old. On the way home from school each day, a young Ethiopian boy would throw stones at my son. Keith would run home. One day I told Keith I would follow him and he should not look back at me. I didn't know what I would do or say to the Ethiopian boy, but I prayed. The boy was throwing stones as usual. Lord, I prayed, what should I do? No answer. I walked up to the Ethiopian boy and was at a loss for words. As I put a friendly hand on his shoulder, the prayer was answered by me asking the boy if he knew English, and then, what is your name? He said, Joseph. I then said, why aren't you in school? No money, he said. I then asked him if he wanted to go to school, and I would pay the fee. He smiled, said yes, took my hand, and walked me to his school. I paid the fee, met his family, and obtained jobs for his father and older brother. What a lesson about God's wisdom I learned in that encounter with that Ethiopian boy. Mordecai and Esther also learned that God can work behind the scenes. I learned, as Mordecai and Esther did, that we are important but not essential. God is essential in our lives. We have a part in the play of our life, but we are not the main act. Prayer. Lord, help us see the big picture, that you are in charge and will use us to accomplish your will in our lives. Amen. God bless you. Have a good week, and there will be a special secular story about fathers next week.